So first of all, thank you so much for putting the time aside to join us today, and welcome to our webinar, How to Enhance Your Onboarding Program. If you received an invite to this more than 3 or 4 weeks ago, you'd have seen the name had changed. It was originally called How to Stop Your Onboarding Program Being an Expensive Failure, which I liked as a title, but we deemed was a little negative, so we decided to spin it in a more positive way. But essentially the content's the same. We at Interactive Services have worked in the training, design and development industry for 24 years. A large proportion of the work we've always done has been around new hire and onboarding. We've learned a great deal. We've learned a lot about what to do, and we've learned from our own mistakes as well. So we've learned a great deal about what not to do. Now I'm lucky enough today to be joined by Damian De Barra. My name is Matt Plass. I'm the CEO of Interactive Services US, and Damian is our Learning Solutions Director. And he's been instrumental in the last year or so of pulling together all of that knowledge and information that we've gained around onboarding and new hire and pulling it into a more cohesive structure. So Damian's going to walk you through the majority of the webinar today, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So I would encourage anyone who's on the webinar, obviously with the number of people we have, it's a one-way broadcast, but you can put questions into the chat panel, and Becky, who's running the webinar on the logistical side today, will make sure we see those questions, and we'll hope to answer all of them by the end of the session. So for anyone who doesn't know us, here is the 2 minutes on who we are. We are Interactive Services. We are a Dublin-based organization, but almost all of the work we do is in the US. We do have clients in Europe, an increasing number, but our focus has always been to the West, if you like. We have offices in New York, in Bentonville, Arkansas, in San Francisco, and as you can see from the client list, we tend to work with large global organizations for whom branding is very, very important. And as we talk about new hire, we'll be touching, I think, on the fact that the message from the company to the people who are coming into the organization for the first time is extremely important. Now, at this point, I'd like to hand over to Damian. Damian is going to really talk about the lessons that we've learned and the tips we have about creating fantastic new hire program. And the purpose of this webinar is for you to be able to go away with some ideas or some topic discussions or something that at least has stirred creativity on your side. We will be referencing some of the work we've done, and we'll be referencing something called My First Year, which is our approach to onboarding. But I would hope you would see this as very much a workshop that you'll be able to take value from. Now, Damian is also pulling all of these ideas into an article, which we'll be sending out towards the end of the month. So if you're interested in what's here, you'll receive a follow-up at some point around that. So Damian, maybe I can introduce you at this point, maybe just say a little bit about yourself, your background in this area, and then I think you can kick us off into the main presentation.
Great, thanks Matt. So good morning, good afternoon, or even good evening to those of you joining us. And again, like Matt said, thanks to all of you for setting aside the time to spend with us today. So my name is Damian De Barra. I'm the Learning Solutions Director at Interactive Services. That's a new position for me. Up until recently, I was the head of instructional design, and before that I was a learning manager. I've been with the company about 6.5 years now, and my background has always been in training and development in some form. If anybody wants to know a little more, please feel free to check me out on LinkedIn. You'll find more than you need to know about me up there on that page. Today, though, I want to really talk about onboarding. In the 24 years we've been in business, we've partnered with, as Matt said, many of the world's largest clients. And in the last 3 to maybe 4 years in particular, we've seen a shift in focus in many of our clients towards giving greater importance to onboarding. And when we do analysis pieces with clients across different industries, across totally different job profiles, across different parts of the globe, we keep seeing the same patterns. We keep hearing similar stories. We keep seeing similar mistakes, if I can call them those. And so everything we do, everything we focus on is essentially designed to drive us or onboarding programs towards 3 critical aspects, and that is engagement, retention, and productivity. Now, what do we mean by those? Well, let's talk about the bad. Matt joked earlier on we changed the name to be more positive, but let's focus on the negative for a second. So what do we mean by engagement, or maybe lack of engagement? Well, lack of engagement would look like it's day one, I don't know what I'm doing, where do I start? Oh no, everything's coming at me at once, I'm drinking from the fire hose, I can't engage, I'm drowning. and you have that experience of being somewhere between stultifyingly bored because you don't feel the values of the organization you joined, you don't feel the excitement, and also you're drinking from the fire hose and there's just too much coming at you too quickly. Retention, well, retention is the issue which arises from the lack of engagement, which is that, for example, in some call centers we worked with, their retention levels are quite frightening, or what you might say the opposite of that is attrition levels. We see a very large number of people leaving an organization inside of 30, 60, 90 days because their engagement has not been guaranteed by the opening communications through the onboarding experience. And we'll share a few statistics and notes with you in a few minutes. And then productivity, time to productivity. To take my call center example again, how fast can I get this guy or this girl actually answering the phone, taking phone calls and dealing correctly with customers? Is that 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? What can we do, is the question we ask, to get productivity happening faster? So Matt, maybe if you move on to the next slide there, please. By the way, guys, Matt is driving today, so you're going to hear me say that over and over again. So let's dig into this a little bit more. So most employee attrition, or the opposite of retention, happens in the first 3 months. And new hires typically become productive after, yes, you're reading that correctly, 9 months in their role, which is quite an amazing thing. Now, here's the real kicker. The cost of replacing an employee is sometimes as much as 3 times their salary. Think about that, the resources and effort required in going through all those resumes or CVs, interviewing those people more than once, more than twice. And, you know, then all the cost you spend on onboarding them and how much it all costs. So this, a second factor on attrition rate is that disengaged employees, ones who are not engaged, is something like 12 times higher than it is for highly engaged employees. And in fact, 45% of employees will look for other jobs outside their current organization within the year if they do not feel engaged. Or if I could put it another way, if they don't feel loved, if they don't feel like the values of the organization are meeting them, if they don't feel welcomed and enthusiastic. Next slide, please, Matt. Thank you. And then 80% of employees who were dissatisfied with their direct manager were disengaged. And the role of the manager and the role of buddies, the role of leaders, we might say, is critical to how we approach onboarding training and at the core of our My First Year approach. So as you can see, 33% of senior leaders believe that employee loyalty has a direct relationship to profits. I wonder if those of you listening in today and how you feel about those numbers. Do you feel those numbers are actually higher? Is employee loyalty, does it have a more direct relationship to profits? Interesting nonetheless. Next please, Matt. Thank you. And then finally, employees who gave their company culture low marks were 15% more likely to be looking for a new job. And 44% of millennials expect to leave their current employers in the next 2 years. I think the first of those stats is really interesting because it focuses on company culture. And I made a sort of joke there about feeling loved. Well, we've often heard this research that younger folks, I'm not crazy about the term millennials, but let's call them younger folks coming into the workplace, really do place a high premium on feeling that the organization which they are joining is making a difference in the world, that the organization they are joining has a culture which they can be proud of. They'd be happy to go to a dinner party with friends and say where they work and explain the values of the company they work for, because it's very, very important. Personally, I don't think that's just a millennial thing or a young person thing. I think that that's the same for anybody at the age of 65 or 75. But that impact of not aligning your new hire to the company's culture and values or articulating it to them can be terribly costly. Next, please, Matt. Thank you. So if that's the bad, what's the good? How do we do this correctly? Well, we take a sort of 5-stage approach. If you were to meet me or Matt and we come into your business and we do a piece of analysis with you and we look at your onboarding, we go through a 5-stage process. First of all, we start with some targeted analysis, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a bit. We want to really get our fingernails dirty, lift the hood up on the car and have a look at what's going on underneath there. What's wrong with the current onboarding training? Where is it falling short? What attrition data do you have? What productivity data do you have? And then really dig into that by speaking to targeted focus groups of learners who've recently been onboarded inside your organization to get the warts and all kind of description of what onboarding is really like. From that targeted analysis, which would be a 2-3 day engagement on site, we build out a design and a roadmap. That is, how many job roles are we designing for? What does the first 30, 60, 90, 120, 365 days look like? Ease of access, we believe that an onboarding experience should be as easy to use as any app on your phone or any website which you would conventionally use. It shouldn't be a struggle. It should in fact be intuitive and even joyful. Meaningful content. I joked earlier on a little bit about the whole sense of drinking from the fire hose. Mandatory content is a classic example of that. Hey, here's all this compliance or financial crimes awareness training you've got to do in a short burst. Is that meaningful to me in my first 10, 20, 30 days when I still don't know where my desk is or who my buddies are or where the photocopier is? Meaningful content is content that genuinely helps you in your job. Mandatory and compliance training is a vital part of that, but so is health and safety training. So is skills training. So is mapping out your goals for the year. There's much more to be done in that first 30 and 60 days to really bring meaningful content to the learner to make them feel engaged and part of the company's values. And then critically, and I'll be coming back to this again and again, is leader support. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in a couple more slides. Thank you, Matt. So, oh, there we go. So piggybacking onto that thing about the leader engagement, if I were to almost say you remember nothing else I say today and you were only to remember one thing that Damian said at all, it would be this. It's what we call the accountability principle, which is that we can design, or you can design, the world's best onboarding program with a brilliant welcome pack and everything's ready on day one and you got an enthusiastic buddy sitting by and you've got, you know, great materials and everything's good. But if leaders, mentors, managers, human resources, and a buddy are not folded into that experience mapped across 30, 60, 90, 180 days, if there's no accountability, none of it's going to stick, or it will really struggle to stick. So what do we mean by this? It's not enough to just give a learner a piece of e-learning and say, hey, go do that piece of e-learning. Somebody has to talk to them about this. So ideally what we like to do is to say, well, after you've done a learning event, that could be an e-learning course or maybe a webinar like this one or a self-study exercise or maybe a game, whatever it is, there needs to be some kind of accountability. The new learner or the new hire needs to sit down with a buddy, a mentor or a leader and just do a debrief. We don't mean examine people all the time, quite the opposite. In fact, what we want to offer is support. So we build in regular, crucial, non-negotiable checkpoints, as we call them. So I'll be coming back to this idea of the accountability principle, that everyone has skin in the game a couple of times. Next slide, please, Matt. Thank you. So let's get into this in a little bit more detail, and we'll come back to the accountability principle. So we got the top 5 tips, if you like, to turbocharge your onboarding program. And I think as we go through these 5 tips, some of them will be quite self-evident to you, and some of them you'll probably already know, but perhaps 1 or 2 might be a little bit new and surprising. So number 1, we design onboarding experiences that build accountability into the process to guarantee new hires get supported. That word again, supported, from day 1 to day 365. The bad, if you like, sometimes looks like I got loads of support day 30, day 20, day 45, but after that all the support and the access and the conversations and the check-ins kind of drove off a cliff and disappeared. That's a very common experience we hear from recently onboarded learners. Loads in the first 30 days and then I kind of felt a little bit abandoned. So we want to make sure that that support, that skin in the game, goes way beyond just the first month. So next there, please, Matt. Thank you. And so here's a couple of examples of what that might look like in the wild. So here's some quotes we picked up from, these are real quotes from real learners and real managers. So I'm a manager. I focus on a new hire's job role and I leave onboarding to HR. I work in HR. Once the new hire walks through the door, I leave it to the manager. I imagine a few of you might be grinning and nodding right now. You may have seen or heard phrases like this. Without clear accountability and ownership, onboarding slips between the cracks. The support just stops. A learner might say, I'm not clear what's required of me as the manager of a new hire. Managers need clarity on their responsibilities. Briefing the managers, giving them a track for the 30, 60, 90, 180 days is every bit as important as it is as it is to explain that to the new hires themselves. And then as a manager, I don't feel fully equipped to support the new hires. So managers need skills, they need resources and guidelines to support new hires. So to summarize, it ain't just about giving the new hires the tools. We've got to give the managers and the buddies the tools too. So important. And here's an example of that from our My First Year platform. Matt's going to talk about this in a little bit later on. But you can see here, this is a sort of report dashboard that a manager might use. And he can see, for example, whether Felix, I beg your pardon, whether Alan, if we take the first row across, has done day 1 or month 2 checkpoints, he gets a clear one-glance snapshot of where each of the person in his cohort of or intake of new hires exactly is. He can also see who the buddy is, so the buddy can be nudged. And we have different views of this My First Year page. There's also a buddy view, which tells the buddy what their responsibilities are. In essence, the My First Year portal does the nudging. And some of you will be familiar with that term from behavioral economics. Or another way of putting it is that I like to refer to it as the nagging. The system does the nagging and lets you know where you're going to be, what you're going to do, and who you're going to do it with. So the second thing we like to do is ensure that new hires have a clear framework for success and a go-to network for support. This means a manager or a leader who can help them set goals, and a buddy who can help them with smaller, more informal leads, and a clear path of communication and backup for HR tasks and queries. So there's really 3 parts to that. There's the manager and leader, who we've talked about a bit already, and then there's the buddy. There's some remarkably eye-catching statistics about the number of people who leave organizations, and when they cite why they left, one of the #1 things they mention is, well, I didn't make any friends. So we like to suggest the assignment of an onboarding buddy to the new hire, somebody who can tell you where the photocopier is, somebody who can answer those slightly more informal, off-the-cuff questions, the kind of things that maybe you don't actually want to bother your manager with, but you do need an answer to. Someone who can take you for lunch. And then a clear path of communication is to HR. That's the third aspect, which is that if there is a more formal query around annual leave or entitlements or benefits, that there is a clear path of communication, a named HR officer that the new hire knows they can go to. Next, please, Matt. And here you can see how we've kind of mapped this out just a little bit. This is a sanitized version of an onboarding experience as it might look. And you can see here we've got a before day 1 aspect. You get an email, you get a culture movie, you get an infographic, real kind of hearts and values stuff. Day 1, I get my welcome box, new hire checklist, and I meet my coach or my manager, and I meet my buddy. And you can see there that we've mapped out week 1, week 2, 3, and 4 in great detail, and then months 2 and 3 and 4 to 12, the cadence of interactions with the buddies and the managers, and the cadence of interactions with learning events becomes, you know, you can think of it as a sliding scale downwards towards the end of day 365. But we try to maintain a consistency of experience, particularly in the checkpoints. Next one, please, Matt. Thank you. And here's how that might look inside the My First Year portal. This is using the portal version. So I come in as a buddy and I can see, well, I probably don't need to explain this to you guys. It's pretty self-evident what it does. It's clear, it's intuitive, it's mapped out. I know what I got to do, where I got to go, who I got to talk to, and how long I've got to do it. So I have no excuses. Oh, yeah, that's another thing worth mentioning. And key to all the success of all this mapping out of the framework for success is regular checkpoints, meetings and events to provide structure and opportunities to explore areas for discussion. Putting it another way, what gets discussed sticks. What gets talked about adheres. And in the first month or 2 months of an onboarding experience, we like those checkpoints, both with the buddy and the manager, to be really quite frequent as once a week, if not more than that. With the buddy, almost, we'd even suggest every day. In the buddy track, when we provide materials to buddies, we actually encourage them, say, hey, listen, just, you know, you're only meant to meet with this person formally once a week, but drop by their desk once a day, just see how they're doing, see if they need anything. Make sure that this person gets enough communication and a feeling of support. Next, please, Matt. Thank you. And here we have an example of that built in, another view from the My First Year portal. Here you can see some of the individual activities, how to succeed at Acme being you guys. Build your My First Year calendar. Then you might have a functional training model on, I don't know, how to use PowerPoint, a coaching conversation, a buddy check-in, and then a leader checkpoint. So the coaching conversation, in case you're wondering, might be your line of business conversation. You're a sales guy. Let me talk to you about sales targets. A buddy check-in is checking in with your friend, and the leader checkpoint is that slightly more formal sit down with a checklist. It's not an assessment, but it is a slightly more formal way of sitting down and making sure that what gets discussed sticks. So next, please, Matt. Thank you. Number 4, we nudge people to remind them what they need to do and when they need to do it. We all know this. The first month in a new job, it's terribly exciting. Everybody and everything is coming at you, and it's oh so easy to skip that meeting, to jump that call. or just to forget about it because you're drinking from the fire hose. We use the My First Year portal or approach, because we can build this with your own internal tools to let you know exactly where you got to be and what you got to do. So it can be as simple as a simple email. We believe that people do need to be given a nudge. It's human nature. It's why notifications and apps are so powerful on your phone. And let everybody know what they got to do. So let's say you've got a checkpoint on Friday. We might mail you on the Monday and say, hey, remember, you got a weekly checkpoint with your leader on Friday. Here are the 3 things you might like to do. Wednesday, hey, you got that call in 2 days. Are you ready yet? Remember, here are the 3 things you need to do. Friday morning, you've got the call at 2 o'clock today. Don't be late. Friendly tone, but it is removing any opportunity for anybody in the process to have any kind of an excuse for not having engaged with the requirement. Number 5, we provide easy-to-use tools and resources to drive people towards self-sufficiency and self-development, making sure the new hires are assuming accountability for their own progress from day one. Put it in plain English, we want learners, new hires, to become very quickly in the habit of looking for stuff themselves. The buddy and the leader are there to guide and support, but in a very short period of time, 30, 60 days, we want these people to be self-starters. We want them to be looking for resources. We want them to know where the tools are. We want them to know where the internet is. We want them to know where to find training. We want them to know where to go to get help and have a network of people. We identify a network of 5 or 6 people that you can go to for support when you need it. Next slide, please, Matt. Thank you. And here's a couple of examples of tools. You can see here we provide online e-learning courses. Tools could be a website for compliance information or contact details for your network, just-in-time videos, interactive infographics, games. Sometimes it's as simple as just a really simple, very clever document or a how-to. You get the general idea. The point is we want these tools to be consistent for the experience for the learner, to have a similar branding, a similar tone, and crucially, we want them to be really, really easy to find. We don't want people rummaging around in the basement of an intranet trying to find 2 lines worth of information. Everything's got to be a couple of clicks away. So that brings me roughly to the end of the 5 principles I wanted to outline, and maybe at this point, Matt, do we want to pause and do a little bit of QA, see if we have any questions in the chat window?
I think we do. So before we see if anyone's sent any questions in, I'd actually like to ask a couple of questions, Damian, just partly to summarize what you've said and partly just to tease out a couple of ideas here. So I mean, I've seen a lot of onboarding programs where the content is fantastic and it's really the engagement piece that's missing, or the manager's track that's missing. So, you know, you've built something beautiful and nobody comes, is what we hear often. What do you think is the piece that is most often overlooked when people are creating a new onboarding program? What's the bit that gets left behind?
Well, yeah, brilliant question. It's 2 or 3 things, but if I have to pick one, I think it's the drinking from the fire hose experience. I think it's that thing of trying to put too much into the first 30, 60 days and completely overwhelming the learner. And it comes from a good place. Everybody wants to make sure that the learner and the new hire gets everything they need as quick as they can, but spreading it out, the cadence of things is ever so important. The cadence of events, making sure that they don't have to do all mandatory training in 30 days, do they? Can't we spread it over 60, 90, or hey, even leave it to a little bit later in the year? So I think just that simple, people tend to forget about how overwhelming onboarding can be, the first 30 days in particular.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And then my next question is really around how you do this. So we've worked with organizations where they are completely revamping their approach to new hire, and it's essentially a change management project, and I think sometimes people don't really realize that until they're halfway through it. So from your perspective, from what you've seen, what is the biggest impediment to putting together a really first-class onboarding program? What's the obstacle that people find most difficult to climb as they try to do this in their own organization?
Well, you used 2 really important words there, which is change management. I've often joked that, well, it's not a joke, but I've often said the training is the thin end of the wedge of change management. If you are overhauling your onboarding program in a large organization, there's some change management going on. That means that people might have very natural anxieties. It might be affecting people's job roles. It might be affecting their job security. So I think sometimes, I don't know if I want to describe it as an impediment so much as something to be thought of, but there can naturally be a large amount of anxiety, and you know, a lot of people have skin in the game around that time when an initiative like that is happening.
Yeah.
To make it work, I know I've said it like 6 times, but the accountability principle. Managers, buddies, and HR need to be intimately looped into the system or the process or the experience to ensure not just that it gets designed properly, but that it gets supported properly across 365 days.
Yeah, and how do you make that happen? I don't mean from a functional perspective, because we've seen how you do that through nudges once the program's set up. But if you're sitting down at the very beginning of this journey and you're about to start thinking about engaging stakeholders and talking about how you're going to redesign new hire, that change management piece, how do you communicate that internally, and who do you need to have on side for it to work?
Right, so brilliant question. So we need HR in the room, because the goals set across the first 365 days will eventually connect to personal development reviews. So I don't think they're in any way separate things. The HR need to be in the room, and those things need to be mapped out from the beginning. There needs to be somebody there who can speak for and have the authority to speak for managers, someone who has the authority to go to senior management again and say, to make this work, we need accountability. To need accountability, the managers have to take on X or Y amounts of responsibility per week for that new hire across the 365 days. And there needs to also be, I think there needs to be representatives of the learners. I'm a big fan of focus groups coming in, actually letting learners speak, because oftentimes onboarding training can be done it's a sort of, fire and forget kind of approach, and we can forget to hear just how overwhelmed training can be for a new hire in the first 30 days. So I think a combination of those three things, HR in the room, somebody to represent and who can communicate with management, and then somebody who represents the learner group itself.
Got it. Thank you. That's good advice. And then the last question for me really is, if you had to summarize what you've said today and pick one thing that you think people should do differently or should be doing as they redesign an onboarding program, what would that one thing be?
Well, I'd say two things. The first of which I'll say, maybe the sixth time, the accountability principle. Got to have skin in the game. The second one is maybe when you're sitting down, that initial first conversation, ask yourselves a simple but powerful question, which is that don't look at how your onboarding is done right now, but ask yourselves, what would this look like in 12 or 18 months' time if it was easy? If this was easy and everything just went swimmingly, what would it look like? And then almost start with the vision of that, and then sort of back engineer from that position. And accountability and all the kind of buddy and manager stuff will come into it, but I would say start with a real blue sky vision, thinking, what would this look like if it were easy in 12 to 18 months?
That's great. Thanks so much, Damian. So I just want to see if we do have any questions. I'm not sure we do. If anyone has a question, now is your time to throw it in, and I'll see if I can get to it before the end of the end of the session. But in any case, for everyone who's on the line now, we will follow up with you with a copy of this presentation. And if you have any questions or you'd like to learn more, then we'd be very happy to do that. We've referenced My First Year portal a few times. This is our approach to onboarding. It can be as simple as a piece of analysis or as complex as setting up a piece of transition software and all the content goes with it, or something in between. But I think the principles behind it are useful to organizations, whether they end up using our approach and our platform or not. So I wanted to make you aware of that. If there is any interest out there, we'd be very, very happy to talk to you about it. Finally, just want to say thank you to Damian. I think that was a really valuable 35 minutes that we've spent looking at onboarding. If there are any questions, I'll do one last check. I'm not seeing any, but please feel free to follow up with them as we go. And we'll be in touch very soon. And thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it's lunchtime.
Matt,
yes.
Bear with me there. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry for jumping in. There is actually one question. Will charts be made available? Will the charts?
Yes, they will. So we'll send all of the presentation slides out, and we'll follow up by the end of the week.
Perfect. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon.
Goodbye.